So here you have it, the finished build of the Tamiya Grasshopper II. The only thing left to do is put a receiver, charge battery, and that's it. So it was a very fun build. The part that slowed me down a little bit is prepping and painting this beautiful Tamiya Grasshopper II body. It is actually painted. I've actually painted about 3 coats of white airbrush and lightly wet sand in between. The only thing I might do left is applying a clear coat. There's no clear coat on there, not totally shiny, but it looks so much better than unpainted. I mean, you could apply the decals over unpainted body just the way it is. It has some type of a shine to it, but in my opinion, you're better off painting it. It looks much better. Applying the decals weren't too bad. I've used soapy water and so I could position the decal easily, and I must admit I did remove a few times and repositioned, especially this one here and this one here and this one here. However, once it's dry, oh, another thing, this thing here, this was a little bit tricky to apply. And once it's applied, I've used a heat gun to apply light heat so that it activates the glue, and it also stretch a little bit to form the corners. That really helped, and that's why it looks nearly perfect. Of course, it's not perfect, but perfect for me, the way it turned out. I really like the look of the Grasshopper II. I actually prefer the looks of it over the original or the first issued Grasshopper. For some reason, I like the color coordination, the decals, and the overall shape and look of the body. As well, I'll go over a little more. The rear, the suspension in the back of the Grasshopper II is much better than the original Grasshopper. But of course, it is an entry-level buggy and it still has its flaws, and which makes it fun. Of course, the spring shock in the front makes it very bouncy. One thing I really like, I prefer these tires than the original Grasshopper, and you don't have to have all those screws and nuts with the bead locks together. It's a lot easier to put these wheels and tires together. It saved probably a good half an hour to an hour of the build. Other than that, it looks like it's a very, very fun buggy. Unfortunately, I won't be able to run this because I actually built this for a friend of mine, and he said he will put on a shelf, so it's going to be a shelf queen. So I would never, I wouldn't be able to do running video, but stay tuned on my channel. I do have the Grasshopper II Black Edition, which I will build and do a running video probably sometime this summer. So I did one light coat of paint, airbrush, using Tamiya X2 white, and I light sanded with 800 grit sandpaper, wet sand, So to smooth it up a little bit, and I'm about to do a second coat, possibly the last coat of white airbrush, and then I will do clear coat. So here's a second coat of white with light wet sand before. Still not as shiny or smooth as I'd like, so I did apply a third coat, and then let it dry and apply the decals. So I want to mention, going back a step here, the build. This was a tricky part with the spring mechanism. However, after several attempts, I was able to get it right. It's a little spring that goes in the rear suspension. And here is the assembly of the shock, the rear shock, very straightforward. So there you have it, the rear suspension. All the different degrees of movement, pretty neat. There's the almost completely built. Adding the front suspension arm, the A-arm, and the uprights and steering mechanism. Fairly straightforward. So some final thoughts of the Tamiya Grasshopper II. I have the original, also the reissued Grasshopper here in front of you. So I noticed the Grasshopper II is slightly longer, about a quarter of an inch or half an inch. Mainly because of where the rear gearbox is mounted. It's pushed back a little bit because it has the pivoting suspension here. So with that, the back end pushes back a little more. Other than that, I think it would have been about the same length. So other thing that I mentioned earlier is the original Grasshopper the rear doesn't pivot left and right, just goes up and down. This happened just to have the Hornet shock upgrade, but other than that, it just have this simple degree of movement here. So when you're turning, the rear end tends to tire skips or bounce a little bit. This one here, I have not tried it, but I would imagine similar to the Hornet, it doesn't skip as much. So it does improve on the handling. The front end, the Grasshopper II shock seems to be, actually it does not only seem, but it does travel a little more than the original. A little beefier suspension, not much. I don't think it's affect much of the handling, but overall they're very similar. I mentioned earlier the wheels and tires are different. Also the body a little bit different, but they're both hard plastic. And I mean, more of a preference in my opinion if you like this style or this one here. And again, the main differences to me is the rear suspension. What I like about the Grasshopper II, this suspension here is mounted on the outside versus the original Grasshopper more on the inside. So you're very limited with the suspension here. It has to be very narrow, the shock itself, to be able to fit in there. This here, you have much more option finding the right rear suspension, which makes a huge improvement on the handling, because obviously most of the weight, or the majority of the weight of the buggy, is in the rear end. Of course, ideally you want the front oil shock as well. But this is not what the Grasshopper is about. It's more of an entry-level buggy, and some may say the way it handles the bounciness of it makes it a lot of fun. So that's all I want to say about this Tamiya Grasshopper II, and that's it. And thanks for watching.